Welcome. You are listening to and hopefully even watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and maybe you're watching it on YouTube or you're listening to it on whatever platform. Please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff really helps us out a lot when you do that. Well, hey, it's Monday. It's November 2nd, 2020. And, well, the election is ongoing, actually. Never really stopped. It's been going on for the past week. Early voting. I did it myself on Friday. Got mail-in balloting taking place. All these things, and well, polls have tightened. Odds of civil unrest have grown dramatically. Let's see what John Rubino has to say about it. You find John over at dollarcollapse.com. Happy Monday, John.
Hey, Kerry. Happy 2016. It looks like we're back to that whole pattern again, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, this is back to the lockdown future. And yeah, it really does have, I guess, as Yogi Berra would say, deja vu all over again.
Well, no, I was thinking about the election, how, right before some scandal with the laptop comes out, and then the polls, which have been really wide, start to tighten. And now it looks like it's within the margin for error in the battleground states and everything. So all of a sudden, we've got a horse race again. Whereas before, based on the polls, it was a total blowout 3 weeks ago. And now, just as in 2016, everything's tightening. So it looks like a close election again.
Well, I have to confess, I never believed any of the polls.
Well, you were right.
They're all agenda driven. They're all polls. An ideal poll should be one that is taken to reflect the opinion of the populace, of the population. These polls are deliberately given to manipulate and gaslight the public and make them think that something is true, which isn't necessarily true. And, we saw this last time. It's the exact same thing happening this time. It seems to me I called it on November 9th, 2016, that Trump would be reelected the day after he was elected last time. I can't say I'm so certain this time, but betting odds, I put it on Trump because he's running against some guy that doesn't even exist, running against a system. He's running against the deep state, the shadow government. He's running against everyone but Joe Biden. He's not running against Joe Biden because if he was, this election would have been over a long time ago. This guy is non-compos mentis. He can't draw enough people to fill a gymnasium, a high school gymnasium, let alone a major stadium and an airplane hangar. It's a big illusion, but yet he still has a chance of winning.
That's the other way that this is like 2016 again, where the enthusiasm gap is astounding. You see Trump. What did he get in Pennsylvania just this last week? Like 50,000 people showing up to one rally in the crucial battleground state. So that's got to be terrifying to Democrats. And then meanwhile, you got Biden, getting 16 people in some junior high or something like that. So yeah, it's very similar to what happened before. And, who knows how this plays out in the end, but the trends are definitely towards something a lot like the last election. So amazing. And then meanwhile, a really close election has a lot of people spooked about civil unrest afterwards, as whoever loses doesn't accept the validity of the result. And so they're building a big fence around the White House and the cops in all the big cities they're on double shifts and they're on high alert and everything. So the coming week has a lot of people really spooked. And again, this might be one of those things that because we see it coming, it doesn't happen, but everybody's gearing up for it just in case. And, go try and buy a gun right now and see if you can find one out there, because they're hard to get in a world where everybody's gearing up for some kind of civil war or at least civil unrest. So yeah, these are scary times. And, what's funny is JPMorgan Chase just came out and said, political chaos is great for stocks. So they're just right out front about it.
When did that happen? I'd like
Zero Hedge has it this morning.
Yeah,
that's their headline.
I'm just saying, when did chaos and uncertainty become good for the stock?
Oh, well, it's because the worse the chaos, the bigger the stimulus bill. And that's all the stock market cares about now, is how much money is the Fed going to dump into the stock market? And, if it's a lot of money, that's good for the stock market. And what does it take to make it be a lot of money? An economic collapse and or civil unrest. So the big players in the stock market now are kind of, let me give them credit and say they're ambivalent, that they don't necessarily hope for civil unrest, but it will make them a lot of money if it comes in their calculation. So they're not broken up by the idea either, and that's giving them a lot of credit. They're probably just happy about civil unrest because they're safe. The top guys on Wall Street are insulated one way or another from whatever physically happens out there in the streets. But if the next few weeks are like the previous few months, when the rich got vastly richer, then they're not going to be broken up about this at all.
Yeah, well, the rich have done quite nicely for themselves, haven't they? One thing you mentioned here, the minority turnout, is appearing to be disappointing compared to last time, and that could have a big impact on the outcome.
And meanwhile, people who, based on their profile, might be Trump voters, are registering and showing up in higher than expected numbers. So yeah, the momentum definitely shifted to Trump in the last week. But again, that's not a prediction that he wins or anything. That's just a statement of the momentum facts as they are right now. So we will see. Because you've got these polls that are untrustworthy, and you've got shifts in momentum, but you've also got all the cheating that's going on too. Hey, these mail-in ballots are such a hilarious thing. I gotta tell you my own story. I'm in Washington State now, and they sent me a mail-in ballot. So I filled it out and put the ballot in the inner sleeve and put the inner sleeve in the envelope and signed the outside of the envelope. But then the stuff I've seen lately makes me kind of worry about it, because one is, in some places at least, they're matching signatures, where the signature on your ballot has to look like the signature on your driver's license, let's say. But I took extra care to write out a really legible signature on my ballot. So it doesn't really look like the scribble that I have on my driver's license. So my ballot might be invalidated because of that. And then just lately, I saw somebody lamenting about how many ballots are going to be disallowed. And one of the reasons why is that people don't put stamps on their envelopes, which I didn't do. It had its own special mailbox, which I figured was just an accumulation center where people would pick up the stuff and then take it to wherever it's supposed to go. But so I didn't stamp my ballot either. So it could be that I made two mistakes that invalidate my ballot. And if I did that, it's a pretty safe bet that hundreds of thousands of other people made similar mistakes or different but equally problematic mistakes. So we're going to have thousands and thousands of ballots that are disallowed for one thing or another, or are allowed in violation of the rules. So the lawyers are going to feast on this. This is, it's hard to imagine, unless it's a blowout on one side or another where there's no doubt about the outcome. So we don't care about cheating at the margins. These guys each have armies of lawyers, and those guys are going to be everywhere starting, on Wednesday morning. And God, so this has the potential for a really chaotic week or month or rest of the year or whatever. There's just no way to know.
Well, it just shocks me that one of government's, democracy's basic functions is to properly supervise and run elections. And we used to be really good at it. I think we were like the first ones in the world, in the modern world, that started it. And now we have no idea how to run an election. Nobody can do it. Nobody knows how to do it. They don't know how to mail in. They don't know how to fill in blanks on a ballot and scan it. And And is George Soros flipping the votes from Republican to Democrat? Are the algorithms just going to steal the election? None of this. Let's just go back to paper ballots, count them by hand. The system worked for 200 plus years, and it should keep on working. Let's not try to improve, you know, let's just leave it, because people managed to vote, they managed to do it right, and we managed to still have elections even then, and with the exception of LBJ. He was a master election thief himself.
You know, when one side says the other side is the one that's cheating, you can just look back through history and find tons of examples of both sides cheating. Yeah, and LBJ is perfect because he basically, what they would do in Texas when he was on his way up, they would let the votes come in, let them be counted to see what they needed. And then they would call a couple of their pet county commissioner guys and say, okay, we need 750 votes here, and we need 370 votes there. And those guys would just come through with the votes. They would just make them up. And so that LBJ's guy would win by exactly the amount that they wanted him to win. And you know, those are the Democrats, but the Republicans do, they have their own version of cheating, which is usually voter suppression, where they make it really hard to vote. So especially minorities decide that it's not in their interest to show up to vote. And so they skew it their way. But, you know, this is really late stage corruption when a society gets so corrupt and so lackadaisical about it that its days are kind of numbered. You know, this is one of the hallmarks of a system that has, you know, kind of reached its logical limit and has to be reset in some way. So this is just one more sign that something akin to the Great Reset is coming. You know, whether it's a monetary reset or whether it's some, you know, multinational political thing that happens, but one way or another, we're getting close to something like that. And one reason why that's true is that we can't even run an election. You know, if we can't do that, then somebody's going to take control away from us at some point. And, you know, this might be the election that kind of spurs that whole thing.
Yeah, when China can run an election better than us, then we got problems, because it doesn't matter. They don't have to bother with vote counting or anything else. You cast your ballot, but the result is assured. Okay, so stimulus, we're still dealing with stimulus. It's still being delayed.
Good.
Yeah. So John, so stimulus, if it's delayed through the holidays, you're predicting mass bankruptcy and defaults in both private and public sectors, malls, et cetera. What's your take on this?
Well, yeah, one of the things that the lockdown did, among many things that it did, was that it impoverished restaurants and airlines and cruise ship companies and hotel companies. You know, the hotel occupancy rate in New York City now is like 10%. That is a bankruptcy level for most hotel chains. And then state and local governments are, you know, they're broke. They aren't getting enough in taxes to come close to covering their expenses. So all of these guys are bankrupt if they don't get some kind of money in a hurry. Either, you know, we go off lockdown and everybody starts spending again, which seems kind of unlikely at the moment, or the government comes up with a big bailout plan that covers all of these bases. In other words, bails out the cities and states and gives the airlines direct money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way across the economy. They would do that if it wasn't for the election right now, because now they're playing political games with a big bailout, because it's in each party's interest to delay it for a while. Now, if they have the election and then Congress comes right back and passes a big bailout, a lot of these entities that are bankrupt right now will survive. But each month that goes by makes it less likely that a lot of these guys do survive. I mean, what was the store chain? Was it Friendly Restaurants or something like that? That just filed for bankruptcy today.
And they've been bankrupt like 2 or 3 times already.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're bankrupt again. And a lot of other companies, mall owners, you know, how is a mall owner making any money right now? The answer is they're not. You know, commercial real estate in general is, so all of these guys desperately need money. And they aren't going to get it as soon as they need it if we have a couple of months of chaos or political gridlock or whatever. And they won't get it if we have gridlock after the election. For instance, if Biden is the president, but Mitch McConnell is still in charge of the Senate, it's highly unlikely that they're able to have a meeting of minds on what kind of a bailout they're going to do, because the Republicans don't want to bail out these Democrat-run cities, and the Democrats really, really want to bail out those cities, and that's going to be the big sticking point. So maybe we'll get our $1,200 checks, but that might be all we get, and that won't be enough to stop the bleeding. So, even a little bit of political chaos leads to economic chaos. And then at some point, the stock market falls hard enough to focus everybody's minds, and then we get some kind of a big bailout, which, like JPMorgan said, is great for stocks, but horrendous for the long-term future of the financial system, because that's all borrowed money. If we spend another $10 trillion next year of borrowed money, then we're even in worse shape financially than we are now, and now is worse than it was a year ago. So we're closer to that the brick wall when the financial system just doesn't work anymore. So, yeah, there is no happy scenario that you can point to out there, because even a blue wave where the Democrats completely take over, that just means an even bigger bailout. So that doesn't really save us in any meaningful way. 2021 is a decision year when the government has to decide whether to let a bunch of big industries and a bunch of municipal entities go bankrupt, or to borrow literally $10 trillion to bail them all out. And either one of those decisions leads to potential chaos in the financial markets. And it's going to happen next year. So get ready. If we thought 2020 was a chaotic year, 2020 or 2021 could put it to shame.
Well, if you look, Europe is locking down again in another COVID-induced panic, all except for Sweden. Their death rate doesn't seem to have done anything, 2 cases, et cetera. And President Biden, God forbid, promises the same fate for the US. He's going to lock it all down again. And we've already shown that lockdowns don't work. They don't stop the disease from spreading, and they don't really flatten the curve, as it were. You kind of have to let these things run their courses, and yet nobody seems willing to do that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. There seemed to be a consensus, at least in the mainstream media, as of a few weeks ago, that we did a really bad job of managing the pandemic, and that lots of other countries did a much better job. Germany, France, to an extent, Italy, to an extent, a lot of other European countries. And now it's interesting because they're all going back to lockdown, which means they failed. We thought they did a great job, but it turns out they didn't. So yeah, only Sweden, if you look out there, seems to be on the right trajectory. And they were the ones with the lightest touch. So yeah, it looks like it's very possible that just treating this like a seasonal flu was the way we should have approached it all along. And now we might not have any choice. Well, I mean, if the Democrats take over, they will probably go back to lockdown. But I think in the end, it's likely that the damage these lockdowns do will turn out to be actually more deadly than the pandemic itself. Because, locking people down, we've got spiking levels of suicide, drug overdose, child abuse, spouse abuse, and it just goes on and on. And those things are all health problems. And if you add them all up, it's likely that, after the dust clears and we're able to add everything up accurately, that those things, lockdown related health problems turn out to be just as bad as the disease itself. So what a mess, man.
The cure is worse than the disease, as President Trump so aptly stated. We stated it months ago. It's once the thing gets out in the wild, there's no stopping it. There's nothing you do, because it's just going to have to run its course. Yes, we do have excessive deaths due to COVID, but over time that number will normalize, It moved up the death dates of many people, unfortunately. Not to say it's not serious, but we have to accept our limitations as human beings, and that there are some forces of nature that we cannot stop. And this is surely one of them. Hey, so what are we going to see here? Is gold going to be the big winner from this election? Is there going to be a silver wave, John? And what's your take here?
Well, gold seems to be the big winner because, gold generally likes chaos because that's where people hide out, and the scarier the world gets, the better the case for safe haven assets becomes. And already gold is, it's not that far from its all-time high. But it's kind of just trading within a range right now as we see where the political thing goes. But, I think either way, a big bailout plan is coming. I mean, even a total Republican-run government is not going to be able to avoid another several $1 trillion tossed at all these bankrupt industries, at least. Even if they, ignore the cities and states, they've still got to bail out a bunch of industries that employ millions of people. And they will do that, which means debt is going to soar no matter who's in charge, which is good for gold. So I think that, and right now, seasonality is good for gold too. So I think the timing is pretty decent. If you assume things are going to be messy politically for the first few months of the year, and seasonality is always pretty good for gold for the first few months of the year, this is probably an okay time to add to your stack. Now, silver is a slightly different story because, it'll do great if gold does well, no matter what. But there's a more compelling silver argument, which is the blue wave. If the Democrats completely take over the government, one of their almost certain plans will be to ramp up alternative energy. In other words, they'll try to zero out over time fossil fuels and replace oil and gas and coal with solar and wind, among other things, and electric cars. Silver goes into those things generally, and there's not that much free silver out there. So if we really ramped up via government subsidies, solar power and electric vehicles and other kinds of alt energy, there would be a shortage of silver more than likely because there just isn't that much physical silver to satisfy all these demands. And you would see the price really take off. So silver wins either way, which is a nice kind of investment to have where in any scenario, it looks good. But got to say, probably the best scenario for it is the blue wave scenario, where we not only have economic and financial chaos, but we have a massive flow of public funds into technologies that use silver. So I think the stackers who have patiently waited for something like this to happen are going to be rewarded for their patience. Yeah.
Like you and I.
Yes.
In particular.
Yeah.
Well, it's so true. Hey, one final note that you made. Glenn Greenwald resigns from The Intercept. He is a definitely left of center reporter, but a true honest journalist. He was publishing all of the Julian Assange materials before it got fashionable. And he started The Intercept as a response to the mainstream media, because I think he worked for The Guardian, because they started censoring stories that they didn't like. And what happens? Irony of all ironies, The Intercept, his partners, or now his former partners, censor his story about Biden corruption, something we all know is happening. We've known the guy's been corrupt for years. We don't need to get into the particulars. Just understand, if you represent the state of DuPont, which owns Delaware, you're going to be corrupt. There's just no question about it. And he was also the senator from MBNA, famous credit card bank that got absorbed by Bank of America. Point is, Glenn Greenwald is now the paragon of virtue in journalism that is quickly dying off, John.
Yeah, Glenn Greenwald is a giant in the world of investigative journalism. When Edward Snowden accumulated all his NSA data, Greenwald was the guy he called to figure out how to get it out there honestly. which, you know, shows you how big Glenn Greenwald was back then. Out of all the reporters in the world, that's who Snowden knew to call. And then he, like you said, he started The Intercept as a place for real investigative journalism. In other words, nonpartisan. If something's wrong out there, you expose it. And if somebody leaks something to you, you make sure it's true, and then you report it. But along the way, it kind of got hijacked by basically people with an agenda. And the agenda is anti-Trump. And this is Glenn Greenwald's side of the story, okay? And so he wrote an article for publication on The Intercept that looked at corruption in general and mentioned Biden. There was a couple of paragraphs about Hunter Biden's laptop and Biden's general corruption, and they wanted him to take that out. And they said, you cannot publish this here or anywhere else unless you take out the stuff that's critical of Biden, because they don't want to be seen as having contributed to another 4 years of Donald Trump. And so Greenwald just quit. And the other part of this story is that technology has made it easy for guys who do that, who are disgusted by their place in the mainstream media. And it's something called Substack, where you can start your own basic news service, and people can subscribe to it, you know, $5 a month, $10 a month, or whatever. So you build up an audience and you have a job, you know, and you can publish your stuff without editorial oversight. Matt Taibbi just did that. He left Rolling Stone.
Correct. Yes.
And now his Substack is really popular. Glenn Greenwald will probably do the same thing. So these guys are able to bypass the mainstream corporate media, and which is great for us. You know, you got Joe Rogan out there making podcasts without extreme oversight. You know, he's got the Spotify community standards, but they're fairly loose right now. And you've got everybody on Substack being able to publish whatever they want. So a new media is growing up to replace the corrupt old media. And you can bet that the people at CNN and MSNBC and Fox are terrified of this technological trend, because it eats their lunch. You know, if you can just subscribe to the 10 best investigative journalists out there via Substack, you don't ever need to turn on cable news, you know, and I'm looking forward to that day.
Okay. And, you know, the corruption in government in the United States, it's overwhelming. It's a large part of what's responsible for our downfall. The deep state is a form of corruption. The shadow government is just another manifestation of corruption. Until we manage to bring it under control, whatever it's going to take. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is the answer, but he certainly is the enemy of my enemy. I don't know if it makes him my friend, but it sure doesn't make him my enemy. So fact is, did that come out right? Yeah, the enemy of my enemy ain't necessarily my friend, but he's sure not my enemy. And in this case, Trump's been fighting them off from day one, no matter how you cut it. You have any ability to assess the situation honestly, Trump has been in an existential fight with the deep state, particularly the intelligence agencies from the get-go. The fact is, John, the FBI had Hunter, I wanted to call him Hunter Thompson because he shares so many personality traits with the late, great gonzo journalist. But Hunter Biden, they had his laptop while the impeachment's going on, which was totally exculpatory. It showed that Trump was right to call in the new president of the Ukraine and ask for an investigation, that the evidence was there, and yet the FBI just forgot about it. But we could get into the corruption, everything else. Go over to John's site, dollarcollapse.com, sign up for his newsletter, sign up for ours, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. John, we will have a whole new host of topics to discuss next week, regardless who is elected, because none of the problems that are happening now are going away anytime soon, which is why you need to be prepared. As Andy Schechtman over at Miles Franklin said, buy the gold now while you still can, buy the silver now while you still can, because Lord knows at some point in the future, it's going to become very difficult to. We're not trying to panic you, but just keep in mind the possibilities here, which John so artfully illuminated and enumerated in his list of things that are going wrong in the economy. John, we will catch you next Monday.
See you, Kerry.